Hello, my dear curious and studious students of surgery. Myself, Dr. Mahesh Chaudhary. I am warm welcoming you in my surgery lecture series. This surgery lecture series contains entire surgery with anesthesia, with radiology, with orthopedic. So stay tuned with us. Let's start our surgery lecture series. Welcome, my dear friends, in my surgery lecture number 76, that is the burn. In this lecture, we will see the type of the burns, degree of the burns, rule of 9, change of burns in the various systems of the body, and the local changes and systemic changes, treatment of the burns, treatment of the electrical injury, treatment of the chemical burns, and various types of burns, etc. All are covered in this lecture. Burn. A burn is a wound in which there is a coagulative necrosis of the tissue. The various types of the burns are follows. That is the ordinary burns, scars, electric burns, chemical burns, radiation burns, and cold burns. These are the type of the burns. Now, first is the ordinary burns. Ordinary burns means are easily caused by dry heat with fire, open flame, hot metal, or aeroplane crash in civil life, and bomb injuries in war time. Second is the scars are caused by the moist heat, that is the hot liquid or steam. Third is the electric burns, that is the low and high. Low means electrical sources produce direct injury to the point of contact, and high voltage current not only causes direct injury at the point of contact but also damages tissues that conduct the electricity to the body. Here is a good picture of the boiled scald burns. This is the another image showing the layers of the skin: epidermis, dermis, hypodermis, the muscular layers, the connective tissue in the skin. All structure of the skin is seen in this image. We are talking about the electrical burns. Majority of electric burns are caused by voltage electric current. The peculiarity of electrical burns is that it causes minimal destruction of the skin. The skin is involved at 2 points: at the point of contact with the electrical source and at the site of exit at which the patient is grounded. The magnitude of injury of the tissue between the point of entry and the point of exit of the electric current is directly related to the amount of the electric current passing through. Fourth type of the burn is the chemical burn. It is caused by the strong acid or base which comes in contact with skin or any other tissues. The severity of the damage is directly related to the concentration of the chemical agent. The amount of agent and the duration of contact is important in the chemical burn. Fifth type of the burn is the radiation burn. But radiation burn are usually caused by the X-ray or radiation. This is a fact, a type of inflammation of the skin which can be regarded as burn. Now, next point is the cold burns. This is the sixth type of the burn are caused by exposure to cold, which include freezing injuries, that is the frostbite, or non-freezing cold injuries, that is the chilblain localized painful erythema in the fingers, toes, or ears produced by cold, damp weather. Cold burns also cause coagulative necrosis of the tissue. Frostbite results in acute freezing of tissue with the formation of ice crystals. Mostly, the skin and subcutaneous tissue of the hands, feet, ears, and nose are affected. When these parts are exposed to low temperature for prolonged period of time, such injury may occur. Tissue necrosis following frostbite is related primarily to the mechanical effects of ice crystals, cellular dehydration, and microvascular occlusion. Now, the degree of burns. There are various degrees: first degree, second degree, third degree, and fourth degree. First degree frostbite is hyperemia and edema of the skin without necrosis. Second degree of frostbite causes hyperemia, vesicle formation, and for partial thickness necrosis of the skin. Third degree of frostbite causes necrosis of the entire skin thickness and may extend to a variable degree into the underlying subcutaneous tissue. Fourth degree of frostbite means the necrosis of full thickness of the skin, including subcutaneous tissue and all the underlying structures including muscles and bone. This leads to gangrene of the affected part. Now, here is a good picture showing the thickness of the skin layers, degree of burns, depth, and characteristics. In the superficial burns, that is the first degree, only epidermis is burned and characteristics pain, redness, mild swelling. And in the second degree of the burn, that is the superficial partial, dermis and papillary regions is burned, and the characteristics includes like pain, blisters, spotty skin, severe swelling. And the third type of the degree is the thickness is D partial, depth is up to the dermis and reticular region, white lethargy relatively painless, and the fourth degree burn is full thickness burn, that is the hypodermis includes subcutaneous tissues also there, and the characteristics are carrot insensate eschar formation is there. Now here is another image showing the degree of burns, first degree, second degree, third degree, and here the skin structure is also include the epidermis, dermis and hypodermis, involvement of the skin structure according to degree of burn. Now this is another image showing the same picture, degree of burns. Now pathology of burns. For advantage of description, pathological changes of burns are divided into two heads, that is the local changes and systemic changes. First, local changes, these can be described under four heads, that is the severity of burn, the extent of burn, vascular changes and infection. First, severity of burn. Burns are classified into three grades or degrees according to the depth of necrosis. In first degree burn, there is a simply hyperemia of the skin with slight edema of the epidermis. There is only microscopic destruction of the superficial layers of the epidermis, which are discommented within a few days. It is of little clinical significance as the superficial layers of the epithelium as soon replaced from the basal layers, so that there is no scarring. In second degree burns, the entire thickness of the epidermis is destroyed. Bleps or vesicles are formed between the separating epidermis and dermis. Vesiculation is the hallmarks of the second degree burns. Second degree burn is further subdivided into mild and severe varieties. In mild cases, enough epithelium is left in the hair follicles and dermal glands to provide new cells for resurfacing the burn area. In severe cases, there is not enough epithelium left, so that resurfacing of the burn area is not possible and skin grafting becomes necessary. In third type of degree burn, there is a complete destruction of epidermis and dermis with irreversible destruction of the dermal appendages and epithelial elements including the sensory nerves. Skin grafting becomes obligatory to cover the area. Another type of classification is in vogue to describe severity of burn. In this classification, two degrees are considered. First is a partial thickness burn and second is a full thickness burn. First, partial thickness burn. The superficial layers of the skin, that is the whole of the epidermis and sometimes the superficial part of the dermis, become destroyed. But there are enough epithelial cells surrounding the hair follicles or sweat glands from which regeneration may take place. Second is a full thickness burn. The whole thickness of the skin including the epidermis and the total depth of the dermis is destroyed spontaneously. Regeneration of epithelium is not possible. So development of scar tissue and contractures are inevitable unless skin grafting is performed in right time. Now, second point, in the severity of burn, extent of burn, the length and width of the burn wound is expressed as a percentage of the total surface area displaying either second or third degree burn. The extent of burn is most commonly estimated by the rule of 9. Rule of 9 for estimation the percentage of the body surface involved in burns are as follows. Anatomical area, that is the percentage of body surface, as head, face and neck 9%, right upper extremity 9%, lower extremity 9%, right lower extremity thigh 9%, leg and foot 9%, that is total 18%, left lower extremity 18%, anterior trunk, chest 9%, abdomen 9%, that is the 18%, and posterior trunk, upper half 9%, lower half 9%, total 18%, and the genitalia is 1%. Dear students, here is a diagram image. You can see the representation to show how to apply the rule of 9. This image showing the anterior head and neck, the anterior shoulders, arms and hands 9%, anterior thigh and foot, that is the also 9%, anterior and posterior head and neck 9%, anterior and posterior shoulders, arms, hands total 18%, anterior and posterior trunk is 36%, perineum and genitalia 1%, anterior and posterior thighs and legs 36%. In this way, this is the totally cover the body surface area of 100%. Of course, the above mentioned rule of 9 is applicable only to the adults. This rule does not apply strictly to infants and children as the surface area of the head and neck of children is less. Vascular changes. Third point is the vascular changes. There is a dilatation of small vessels due to the direct injury to the vessel's wall and to local liberation of histamine. This increases blood flow to the injured part as seen in case of inflammation. Capillary permeability is greatly increased due to this plasma rich in protein pours out continuously in large amount. This exudates collection in blisters or begins to dry to form a dry brown crust which protects the wound. This crust separates in 1 or 2 weeks in case of superficial burns, but it takes longer time in case of deep burns. Fourth is the infection. At the moment of burning, the skin is sterilized. In case of first degree burns, the intact epidermis will act as a barrier against infection. But in case of deep burns, if the crust which protects the raw wound is broken, virulent organism may enter the burn wound to cause severe infection. Malnutrition, loss of plasma and blood volume anemia in extensive burns severely handicap the defense mechanism against the infection. Bacteremia and bacteremic shock are the second commonest cause of the death in burn following oligemic shock. This usually occurs between the second and third weeks. Now, the second type of the changes is systemic changes. These can be conveniently described under the 4 heads, that is the shock, biochemical changes, changes in blood and systemic lesion. First, shock. This is the most important effect of burn. Oligemic shock, the direct effect of heat as well as liberation of photoactive materials from the area of injury increases capillary permeability, which permits loss of fluid and protein from the intravascular compartment into the extravascular tissue. This volume shift occur in direct proportion to extent of burn and clinically apparent as edema and blebs. This leads to oligemic shock and oxygen starvation of the tissues. There is an immediate apparent increase in the number of red cells and the hemoglobin level. Protein loss and electrolyte imbalance soon become apparent increase in the number of red cells and hemoglobin level. Protein loss and electrolyte imbalance soon become apparent. Sludging of the blood may occur with intravascular agglutination of red blood cells into the smooth firm clumps. Though there is a hemoconcentration, yet sodium chloride content of the blood tends to fall owing to great losses in the exudates. The potassium level easily increases, probably due to the massive cell destruction and release of extracellular fluid. The result of these changes is burn shock. The intense heat destroys the red blood cells and causes hemolysis, which may be massive and accompanied by the hemoglobinuria. These factors may result in ischemia of the important organs, particularly the liver and the kidney, so that acidosis and uremia may develop, leads to stimulation of adrenal cortex with immediate rise in urinary excretion of 17 ketosteroids. Besides the oligemic shock, other varieties of the shock are also come across in burns. There are neurogenic shock due to the severe pain and apprehension, and third is the cardiogenic shock. Cardiac output falls in the early post-burn period initially as a result of marked increase in peripheral resistance and later on as a result of decreased blood volume and also increased viscosity. The increase in blood viscosity results from the combined effect of the increased hematocrit and aggregation of red cells, white cells and the platelet depression of myocardial function by a humoral factors has been incremented as a cause of impaired cardiac output in patients with extensive burns. However, hypovolemia causing impaired venous return is an obvious cause of diminished cardiac output. Hypovolemia and diminished cardiac output cause decreased renal blood flow and oliguria, which may culminate in acute renal failure. The same cause may also impair blood flow to the other organ. And the next is the bacteremic shock. Is mainly due to the infection and release of toxic material absorbed from the burnt area. The toxic symptoms of burns, that is the fever, delirium, vomiting and bloody diarrhea, are usually caused by both infection and absorption of toxic material. Second is the biochemical changes. In the heading of the systemic changes, these biochemical changes are electrolyte imbalance, hypoproteinemia, hyperglycemia. First, electrolyte imbalance becomes obvious in the form of low sodium and chloride concentration of and high potassium level in the blood. Hyperproteinemia is obvious due to the excessive loss of plasma protein as a result of increase in the capillary permeability and infection. Hyperglycemia may often develop in burns. there will be rise in blood urea, NPN and creatinine levels due to the kidney damage in extensive burn. Now the third systemic changes in the blood are hemoconcentration is due to outpouring of serum. Hemoglobin level may rise to 150% in severe burns. Apparent increase in the number of the red cells is also due to the outpouring of plasma. In abrupt fall in the eosinophils count during the first 12 hours is very characteristic of burns. Anemia, there is an immediate red cell destruction in the early post-burn period. A biphasic alteration of the coagulation system is also seen in burns. There is an early marked depletion of platelets and depression of fibrinogen level. This is accompanied by a parallel increase in fibrin split product level. There is also an increase in factors 5 and 8. Particularly when infection ensues, intravascular coagulation may be seen. Now, fourth is the systemic lesion. Various organs in the body are involved in burns. The liver may show numerous areas of focal necrosis. Kidney is often involved due to low blood perfusion. Moreover, large amount of the blood pigments may be deposited in the collecting tubules of the kidney as a result of hemolysis. In severe cases, there may be hemoglobinuria. Gradually, oliguria and anuria may develop and the patient may die of uremia. Adrenals become slightly enlarged and deeply congested. The severe burns, there may be petechial hemorrhages and small areas of focal necrosis due to the thrombosis. Bilateral necrosis of adrenal cortex may take place in severe cases. The gastrointestinal tract also respond to burn injury, which of course is related to the extent of burn. Gastric and duodenal mucosal changes indicative of focal ischemia can be observed as early as 3 to 5 hours after burns. This is due to diminished mucosal blood flow. Acute ulceration of the stomach and duodenum has been noticed as a common complication of the major thermal injury. These ulcers were first described by the Curling in 1842 and reported to occur in 25% of hospitalized burn cases. Such ulcers are prone to cause gastrointestinal bleeding, but it must be remembered that 85% of such hemorrhage is due to the bacteremia. Acute ulceration of the colon has been recognized in severe burn patients. Alteration of pulmonary function vary according to the extent and location of burn. The presence or absence of inhalation injury. Pulmonary vascular resistance increases in the immediate post-burn period. So pulmonary edema usually does not occur even when large volume of fluid are infused. The actual changes in pulmonary functions following burns are hyperventilation and pulmonary insufficiency, which may be such magnitude as to require mechanical ventilator support. Next point, in the systemic lesions, a change in the endocrine pattern is seen in burn patient. There is elevated glucagon, cortisol and catecholamines levels. Neurogenic changes are not commonly seen in burn injuries. There may be some delirium, disorientation due to the less blood flow to the brain and electrolyte imbalance. Immunological impairment is often seen in burn injuries. Now, the treatment of the burn. This is conveniently described under the three heading, that is the treatment of shock, general treatment, and third is the local treatment of burn wound. First, treatment of shock. In that, sedation is important. Sedative and analgesic medications are almost always required in burn patient. Burn is a very painful condition and moreover sedation is also valuable in shock. As the patients are almost always in shock, sedatives should be given by intravenous route and at an absolute minimum dosage. These should be administered during the first 4 to 5 days. Second is the fluid resuscitation under the treatment of shock. This should be started as soon as possible in all adults with burns of 15% or more of the body surface. In case of children burns, about 10% should be given fluid resuscitation. Blood transfusion is required when the burn involves more than 20% of burn thickness or 40% of partial thickness of total body surface. This is due to the replace of the destroyed RBC. Studies by several investigators have indicated that during the first 24 hours of the post-burn period, colloid containing fluids are not essential for resuscitation as it is not retained within the circulation and exerts greater restorative effects on cardiac output than an equal volume of the colloid-free electrolytes containing fluids, such as Ringer lactate solutions. The colloid solutions not only restore cardiac output more rapidly but also is more efficient in adequate organ perfusion. This is due to more rapid replacement of plasma volume deficit during this time. However, the second day, both crystalloid and colloid solutions are equally effective in restoring cardiac output and intravascular volume. The goal of burn patient resuscitation is maintenance of the vital organ function as soon as possible. Several formulas have been proposed for estimating the patient's fluid needs, and these are based on the weight of the patient and extent of burn. The formula advocated by the Murray is that the first 24 hours in adults, patient's ringer lactate solution is given 1000 to 4000 ml, means 1 liter to 4 liter, and normal saline 1000 ml, that is the 5% dextrose solution 1.5 to 5 liter, and colloid containing fluid in the form of the plasma or plasma substitutes 7.5% of the body weight. In second 24 hours, same amount of the ringer lactate solution, normal saline and dextrose solution are given, whereas colloid containing fluid is reduced to 2.5% of the body weight in the second 24 hours. Evans formula is that in the first 24 hours, normal saline is given 1 ml per kg per percent of burn, that is the 2000 ml of 5% dextrose, and colloid containing fluids 1 ml per kg per percent burn. In second 24 hours, according to the Evans formula, normal saline is given half the amount of the first 24 hours requirement, and colloid containing fluid is also given the half requirement of the first 24 hours, whereas 5% dextrose is given 2000 ml. In Brooke's formula, in first 24 hours, ringer's lactate solution is given 1.5 ml per kg per percent of burn, colloid containing fluid 0.5 ml per kg per percent of burn, and 2000 ml of 5% dextrose solution. And according to the Brooke's formula, in second 24 hours, half to 3/4 of the first 24 hours requirement of the ringer's lactate and colloid containing fluids, whereas same 2000 ml of dextrose saline are given. All these are the formulas for resuscitation by described Brooks, Evans and Murray. Urinary output is a good reflection of adequacy of resuscitation. Oliguria should always be treated by increased fluid administration. These patients usually do not require any diuretic except in 4 categories: those with high voltage electrical burns, those with associated mechanical soft tissue injury, those with particularly deep burns involving muscles, and those with extensive burns and who remain oliguric in spite of giving excess fluid volumes that estimated needs. The diuretic which is commonly used in mannitol is mannitol of 1 ampoule 12.5 gram added to each liter of intravenous fluid until the desired level of urinary output is achieved. However, chest X-ray should be obtained at least daily during resuscitation to exclude pneumonia or other pulmonary complications. Serum electrolytes, blood gases and other baseline blood studies should be performed at frequent intervals. For burns involving more than 20% of full thickness or 40% of partial thickness of total body area, whole blood transfusion should be given, and this whole blood is considered as a part of colloid containing fluids and may be given up to 50% of total burn area. Third point is the maintenance of airway. Patients with burns often exhibit signs and symptoms of hypoxia, which may range from pronounced of tachypnea to respiratory arrest and coma. The diagnosis is confirmed by analyzing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. Treatment includes administration of 100% oxygen with ventilatory support. Upper airway obstruction may occur in patients with burns of head and neck during first 48 hours. Such obstruction is due to the soft tissue edema of oral pharynx and vocal cords due to the exposure to hot fumes. Direct thermal injury to the lower respiratory tract is very uncommon, as nose and oral pharynx are quite efficient heat exchanger, allowing cooling of inhaled hot gas prior to its entrance into the trachea. Impending upper airway obstruction is treated by immediate insertion of endotracheal tube. Tracheostomy may be needed when endotracheal intubation becomes impossible or contraindicated. Once introduced, endotracheal tube is not removed until third post-burn day, since re-intubation becomes technically difficult. Now the second part of the treatment of burns, that is the general treatment. This includes ischiotomy and fasciotomy, tetanus prophylaxis, antibiotics, nutritional support, gastric decompression and treatment of GI complication. First point is ischiotomy and fasciotomy. Circumferential third degree or full thickness burns of the extremities or thoracic wall may form an unyielding crust known as a ischia, which exerts pressure on the blood vessels, causing diminished peripheral pulses and decreased skin temperature with edema due to venous obstruction. The ischia, which is insensitive, is inside on other mid-lateral and mid-medial line. The incision should extend along the entire length of the burn area and carried down deep through the ischia and superficial fascia to the depth sufficient to allow the cut edges of the ischia to separate. The need for limbs ischiotomies may be reduced by continuous elevation of burn extremity and active motions of it for 5 minutes every hour. If ischiotomy has been performed, constant coverage of ischiotomy wound with a topical antimicrobial agent is essential. When edema occurs beneath the investing fascia, such fasciotomy may be required. Fasciotomy should be performed under general anesthesia and these fascia of all involved compartments should be adequately released. Fasciotomy is also required in the treatment of electric burns where there is extensive muscle injury. Second is the tetanus prophylaxis. All burns injuries should be considered contaminated and tetanus prophylaxis is obligatory. Intramuscular administration of the tetanus toxoid in the dosage of 0.5 ml usually provides adequate prophylaxis. Third is the antibiotic. In burns, the microorganisms contaminate the wounds. Usually, gram-positive organisms colonize in the burn wounds. Once necrosis occurs, the wound is essentially avascular, which prevents effective delivery of systemic antibiotic if infection occurs. The pattern of burn wound infection has changed over the past several decades. Before the availability of the penicillin, the streptococci and staphylococci were the predominant organism. Microbial species colonize the wound and may penetrate the avascular ischia. Bacterial proliferation may occur beneath the ischia at the viable non-viable interface, leading to sub-ischia suppuration and separation of the ischia. In the few patients, microorganisms invade the underlying viable tissues, producing systemic sepsis. The burn wound is a potential portal for bacterial entry into the blood. P. aeruginosa products the protropical lesions of invasive burn wound sepsis. Such infections have actually increased as a principal cause of death. The most common site of involvement in burn patient is the lung. Bronchopneumonia in burn patient is commonly caused by the opportunistic organism, especially gram-negative bacteria. Hematogenous pneumonia may also begin relatively late in the burn patients due to the hematogenous spread of microorganisms from the remote septic focus. Usually an aminoglycosides and the semi-synthetic penicillin and administered as the common causative organism is often a strain of the Pseudomonas. Indiscriminate use of the antibiotic will develop antibiotic resistance in the bacteria present in the burn wound and elsewhere. To minimize the such dissemination of organism and development of the bacteremias, antibiotics active against the both gram-positive and gram-negative organisms should be administered to patient undergoing surgical debridement of the burn wound or burn wound excision. Fourth point is the nutritional support in the general condition, general treatment part. In case of all major injuries, increased metabolism or hypermetabolism takes place. Resting metabolic rate approaches approximately twice normal in patients with burn of more than 50% of total body surface. Adult patients with burns of over 40% of the total surface, such measurement estimates about 2000 calories per square meter of body surface per day. So one must be careful is providing adequate exogenous calories and nitrogen to prevent excessive catabolism in burn patients. Wherever possible, tube feeding should be utilized to provide nutritional needs of the patients. Feeding may be accomplished by insertion of small celastic nasogastric feeding tube, through which nutrients are delivered 24 hours a day with a constant delivery pump. If diarrhea or ileus precludes gastrointestinal feeding, parenteral nutrition should be initiated using an intravenous cannula placed in a large caliber high flow central vein. Solutions of synthetic amino acids mixed with the hypertonic solutions of glucose are primarily used with blood levels frequently monitored and kept below 200 mg per 100 ml. Sudden intolerance of a previously well tolerated glucose load is an early sign of sepsis. 500 to 1000 ml of fat emulsion is also given twice a week to prevent the development of essential fatty acid deficiencies. Fifth point in the general treatment, that is the gastric decompression. Majority of patients with more than 20% of total body surface area burns will develop a reflex paralytic ileus during the first 24 hours. Intestinal motility is gradually lost after 12 hours of the burn injury. Vomiting is such a patient carries a high risk of pulmonary aspiration. That is why patients with major burns require introduction of a nasogastric suction to effectively decompress the stomach and upper small intestine until intestinal motility can be demonstrated. Antacid may also be instilled through the nasogastric tube to prevent the superficial erosions of the gastric mucosa. Cimetidine, a H2 receptor antagonist which suppresses gastric acid secretion, may be used in this connection to prevent or to treat stress gastric. Now, the sixth point is treatment of GI complications. Cimetidine may be given parenterally every 4 hours if there is an intestinal ileus and GI feeding is contraindicated. If major upper gastrointestinal hemorrhage occurs, the patient should be promptly treated with ice saline solution. Lavage when hemorrhage cannot be controlled by conservative means. Surgical operation is indicated after opening the abdomen. Gastrostomy and duodenostomy is performed to see the bleeding ulcers and to achieve the hemostasis by overseeing the base of the ulcer. During closure, the subcutaneous tissue and the skin are left open to prevent soft tissue infection. Now, the third point in the treatment of the burns are local treatment. That is the first aid method. The patient should be immediately removed from source of heat. Cold, clean water should be applied to the burnt area and immediately and is continued every 5 minutes. Second point in the local treatment is the burn wound care. After proper resuscitation, attention should be directed to the burn wound. It should be cleansed with a surgical detergents and all loose non-viable skin should be trimmed away. The overlying blister should be punctured and the upper non-viable skin is removed. Such debridement should be usually be performed without anesthesia, but with tremendous aseptic care. At the time of the wound cleansing, the entire wound should be inspected. Silver nitrate must be used soon after injury before bacteria have proliferated on the wound. Its most serious disadvantages are the associated electrolytes imbalances. Cerium nitrate has been shown to be an effective topical antimicrobial drug and currently is undergoing clinical evaluation. Only mefenamic acetate is able to penetrate the ischia and is capable of suppressing dense bacterial proliferation beneath the ischia surface. The non-viable skin of the third degree or whole thickness burn injury is known as the ischia. The remaining ischia is left intact and bacterial colonization is prevented by applying the topical chemotherapeutic agents. Following cleansing and debridement, the topical agents of choice is applied. The choice is now in front of the surgeons to adopt the either exposure method or closed method of treatment. In exposure method, the burn area is left uncovered and the topical agent is applied every 12 hours. In closed method, the wound is covered by dressing in 3 layers. The inner layer is non-adherent and antiseptic and it is either oil-based tuiles or water-based cream. Tuiles usually contain topical chemotherapeutic agent, that is the chlorhexidine, sopramycin and nitrofurazone. Such dressing does not tend to adhere and cause less pain at the time of the change of the dressing. 0.5% silver nitrate soaks may be used and such occlusive dressings are changed 2 to 3 times daily and kept always moistened by application of additional 0.5% silver nitrate solution. The second layer is of ordinary sterile cotton gauze and the third layer is the cotton bandage. In case of one hand, the part is enclosed in polythene bag. The hand is elevated and active exercise is encouraged to reduce the edema and to maintain full range of movement to prevent the contracture to develop. In case of burns of the face and scalp, the exposure method is applied and 1% providine iodine lotion is applied daily. Sulfamycin burn area cream, Salvadine burn cream and 0.5 silver nitrate soak have been introduced which have been good bacteriostatic effect. Silvadine is a chemically silver sulfadizine. And third point, that is the skin grafting in the local treatment. The goal of the burn wound care is the timely closure of burn wound. When the burn wound is covered with a red and finely granular granulation tissue with a surface bacterial count of less than a cube of 10 per square centimeter of wound surface and absence of residual non-viable tissue, it is ready for split thickness skin graft, that is the autograft. At this time of dressing are removed in the operation theatre. Warm pack are applied and autograft skin is applied directly to the areas. Pinch graft are often applied in the burn cases. Early skin grafting should be performed to prevent the scarring and contractures. About the type of the autograft, whether partial thickness or full thickness skin graft is to be used, a dictum should be remembered: the thicker the skin, the better the cosmetic result, and the thinner the skin is better the takeoff. The small interstices of the mesh graft are rapidly filled by epithelialization within the 4 to 8 days, resulting in a somewhat thinner but physiologically functional skin cover. Now the fourth point in the local treatment is the physical therapy and rehabilitation. The major local problem of burns is formation of contracture and deformities. To prevent these problems, a progressive physical therapy, that is the physiotherapy program, should be started immediately after the hospital administration. Now the complications of the thermal burn. First is the curling ulcer. Stress ulceration of the stomach and duodenum, which is known as the curling ulcer, is come across in major thermal burn. Serial endoscopic examination has shown that 85% of the patients with burns exceeding 35% demonstrate superficial mucosal disease within 72 hours of the injury. These lesions seen following successful resuscitation and initiation of the enteral feeding until the burn wound is healed. 30 ml antacid is administered each hour through nasogastric tube to maintain the gastric pH above 5. Cimetidine is equally effective in preventing the curling ulcer and in patients who cannot tolerate antacid. Clinical trials suggest that the early enteral feeding may be as effective as antacid and histamine. Second complication in the burn is the acute pancreatitis. This occurs in the patient with extensive burns with an incidence as high as 30%. Third complication is the acute acalculous cholestasis. This complication occurs occasionally in burn patient in two forms. In one form is the gallbladder is infected by hematogenous seeding from a primary source in the septic burn wound, and the second form, the other representation, occurs in the critically ill patients with marked dehydration, ileus hypernatremia and hyperosmolarity. In this form, the gallbladder and bile are often sterile. Fourth is the superior mesenteric artery syndrome. Fourth complication is very occasionally the superior mesenteric artery may obstruct the transverse portion of the duodenum so that enteral alimentation becomes impossible with duodenal obstruction. And fifth complication is a non-occlusive ischemic enterocolitis, is occasionally recognized in severely burned patient. And sixth complication of the thermal burn is the myocardial infarction, may occur in old burned individuals. Infarctions usually occurs towards the end of the first week after burn. It may be due to the increased cardiac output at this time exceeding the ability of the decreased heart to meet its own perfusion, and infarction occurs. All patients with major burns should be monitored electrocardiographically. Short-acting infusible drugs, that is the dopamine and or dobutamine, are preferable to long-acting drugs, that is the digitalis. Adequate intravascular volume must be maintained to meet the perfusion requirements of the wound and visceral organs. Beta-adrenergic blocking agents should not be used to treat the cardiac diseases in burned patients. Increase after load is treated with intravenous nitroprusside or nitroglycerin. Now the treatment of the electrical injury. As a first aid measure, the electric current should be stopped. If the patient is lying unconscious, one must be exclude the presence of the cardiac arrest and cardiopulmonary resuscitation should be started. Fluid estimates based on the cutaneous injury will definitely lead to under resuscitation, so adequately fluid replacement should be achieved. Cutaneous electrical injury should be debrided, cleared, and topical antimicrobial burn creams are applied. Mefenamic acetate is preferred for electrical injuries because of its superior ability to penetrate the injured tissue deeply and its unique anticlostridial spectrum. Stony heart edema of muscle compartment should require immediate exploration. Similarly, absence of the peripheral pulses distal to the site of electrical contact require immediate exploration. Arteriography may also be helpful in determining the need of for exploration. Narrowing the arteries indicates exploration. Complications include delayed hemorrhage from even moderate size blood vessels due to the arteritis produced by the electrical injury. Cardiopulmonary arrest is a common in type of the injuries. When the exposed limb is explored, all muscles which may be involved by the electrical currents should be exposed. Meticulous debridement is required so that all necrosed tissues should be excised. The wounds are packed loosely and kept open for further checkup in the operation theatre after 24 to 48 hours. In the electrical burns, in electrical injury, the entry point and exit point is important. Now the treatment of chemical burns. As the first aid measure, it is essential to irrigate the affected areas with copious amounts to clean water. The only exception is phenol burns, where water may accelerate absorption. So polyethylene glycol or glycerol should be used. Common pitfalls in the treatment of the chemical burns is failure to remove all contaminated clothing and delay in water lavage. Wound irrigation should be carried out for at least 30 minutes or even more. In some cases, a continuous shower for 24 hours may be needed. There are several chemical agents for which more specific treatment is necessary. Hydrofluoric acid injury is an occupational hazard of glass workers, and treatment consists of prolonged irrigation with benzalkonium chloride solution and excision of any tissue with frank necrosis. Burn caused by the phenol should be washed with polyethylene glycol or glycerol to remove the residual phenol. It must be remembered that if there is a extensive skin damage in chemical burns, early excision is necessary to limit the extension tissue damage. Once healthy tissue is exposed, skin grafting should be done. Cold injuries classified into two groups. One is the frostbite, second is the acute cold injuries from industrial accidents. Frostbite injuries mainly affect the extremities exposed to very cold object or climate. And the second is the cold injuries from industrial accidents may occur due to the exposure of a part of the body to liquid nitrogen or other such liquids which will cause epidermal and dermal destructions. Now the ionizing radiation injury. These injuries can be divided into two groups: localized injury and whole body radiation. Localized injury, which is much more common, and whole body radiation injury. The localized radiation damage in preliminary treated conservative until and unless the true extent of the tissue injury can be assessed. Whole body radiation may be lethal depending on the dose of the radiation. When it is lethal, it causes a slow and unpleasant death. In case of the non-lethal radiation injury, one can come across immune system dysfunction and even systemic damage to the gut mucosa. Dear student, here is the end of our surgery lecture number 76. That is the one. Thank you.